Hey guys, these notes are for factoring by grouping. This is like kind of a lead off into what we're going to be doing the next few note sets. So you need to be really comfortable with how to factor by grouping in order to do what we're doing the next few days. So I promise it's not too bad. Notes are going to be really short. Our essential question is, what is the process for grouping and when do we use this method? So we use factor by grouping when we have 4 terms. Okay? And so basically what we're doing is we're doing a double GCF. Now, I want you to look through all 5 problems. So again, you should be taking notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at all of those problems. They're all 4 terms, okay? So it has to have 4 terms for you to factor by grouping. Also, what form are these in? So look at the form. Look at your exponents, okay? These are all in standard form. They start with the highest exponent and they go lower. So they're all in standard. So when you're doing factoring by grouping, it must be in standard form, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So number 1, this one's going to be a little weird because it's the first one, and when we're learning something new, it's always a little weird. But basically, I'm going to split my 4 terms up into groups of 2. So I'm going to just draw a little line there. I'm only going to draw that line on this first problem, and then after that, I'm not going to draw it anymore because you should be comfortable doing it. All right, so for this first one, we're going to factor out a GCF. So I have 2 terms here, okay? The biggest number I could pull out is a 1, because it's 1 and 7, so I'm not even going to write it. But the most amount of y's I could factor out would be y squared, okay? Because I have 3 and then I have 2. So y squared is going to go on the outside of your parentheses, don't forget. And then on the inside, I have y cubed divided by y squared, which gives me y. And then 7y squared divided by y squared is just going to be a positive 7 left over, okay? So basically, you're treating that as its own problem. Then on the next one, you're going to do the same thing, GCF. So at most, I can factor out a positive 2, and I can't factor out any y's. So you are factoring a positive 2, so I do want you to put a plus 2 there. And then in your parentheses, what's left over? So 2y divided by 2 is going to give me y. 14 divided by 2 is negative 7, or negative 14 divided by 2. Oh, I just forgot. I made a boo-boo. Okay. In my notes when I was writing these, this should be a plus sign, and I didn't do that, and that's why this one didn't work that well. But yeah, make sure that's a plus sign. So this should be a positive 7. Okay. Now look at your parentheses. Okay. Notice what's inside of them. What do you notice? They're exactly the same. So the part in the parentheses should always match. Okay? If they don't match, you did it wrong. So you always want to make sure they matched. Okay? Now the part that's already in the parentheses, you're going to keep in the parentheses. So we're basically just going to move this down. And then what we have left is what we factored out from earlier. We have y squared, and we have the plus 2. So that's going to go in its own set of parentheses, the y squared plus 2. So that's going to come and be here. Okay, so the highlighted green part goes in its own set of parentheses. Okay? And that would be your answer, actually. So we're actually done with the first problem. You're basically undoing double distribution. So you know how normally we do the whole, like, okay, y squared times y, blah, blah, blah. We do the double distribution. We're basically undoing that process. And we're getting the 2 factors that we started at the beginning. Now notice how you have, just in this set of parentheses, you have two terms, which is a binomial, and you have 2 terms in this one. So that means you should have 2 sets of binomials, 2 factors that are binomials. Now I'm going to check this one. I'm only going to check the first one because after the first one, we should know how to check the rest. If I wanted to check, I would double distribute. So I have y squared times y, which gives me y cubed, y squared times 7, which is plus 7y squared. Then I have 2 times y, which is plus 2y, 2 times 7, which is plus 14. And that's exactly what I started up with up there, so I am good. So that is correct. Now, you don't have to check it this way. Your initial check is where you're checking if your parentheses match. So if you feel comfortable doing that, go ahead and try the second one. I'll give you a second to do that if you're starting, if you want to pause the video. Okay, so again, looking at the first 2 terms, again, you want to make sure that it's in standard form. It's already in standard form, so divide. The most I could factor out is a 4, and the most amount of x's I could factor out is 2, so x squared. So on the outside of my parentheses, I have 4x squared On the inside, my leftover is 2x. Now 4x squared divided by 4x squared cancels technically, but it cancels to be a plus 1, a positive 1, right? 4 divided by 4 is 1, x squared divided by x squared is 1, so we just have a 1 there. The next part, the most I could factor out is a 1, and I can't factor out any x's, so that means I factored out a positive 1, so you do have to put the plus 1 there. And then since factoring out a 1 doesn't do anything, my parentheses will stay the same. And you want to check, do my parentheses match? Yes. Okay? So I have 2x plus 1, and then I have 4x squared plus 1. Okay? And that's my answer. Now, I could check this by double distribution. Now, my question for you is 2 times 3 the same thing as 3 times 2? It is, right? So that means it doesn't matter if I put this in the front or this in the back. That's the same thing. So I'm going to multiply the 4x squared plus 1 first and double distribute. I'm still going to get the same thing as if my 2x plus 1 was in the front. So just to let you know, it does not matter the order that you put it in. Okay. Number 3 has a star next to it because there is something different that we have to do with the third and fourth term. But let's go ahead and start this. First two terms, the biggest number I could factor out is a 10x squared. So I have 10x squared. I'm moving fast on factoring that part out because that was in the last set of notes. So we should know how to do that, and if you needed help, then you should have come in for that already. The 10x squared divided by 10x squared is going to give me a positive 1. And then next over here, notice how the front of this term has a negative in the front. So if the third term is negative, you must factor out a negative. Okay? So if that first one's negative, you always factor out a negative. So that means when I divide here, I'm going to have to divide a negative something. Well, the biggest number that goes into 8 and 32 is 8, so I'm going to factor out a negative 8. So negative 8 is the biggest number I can factor out. What I have left is a positive 4x and a positive 1. Okay? What happens if you don't factor out a negative 8? Then the stuff in your parentheses isn't going to match the first one. So your goal is to make sure that they match. And if they don't match, then you didn't factor correctly. Again, GCF means you take out the greatest common factor. And so that might mean that you have to pull out a negative. So I have 10x squared minus 8 and 4x plus 1. And those are my two factors to make that first polynomial up there. Again, with the next two, if you want to try these on your own and you got it, go ahead and try those. Alright, so first term, I can factor out a n squared. I can't factor out a number bigger than 1, so it's just going to be n squared. Or 1n squared, if that makes you feel a little bit better. We have 5n minus 2. And then the next one, the most I can factor out is a negative 6, right? It's a negative. The first one was negative. So negative 6. Negative 30 divided by negative 6 is positive 5. The n's left in there. And then we have negative 2. Parentheses match, so I'm good to go there. N squared minus 6 goes in the first one, and 5n minus 2 goes in the second. Again, it doesn't matter which your order is. Lastly, number 5, we got some bigger numbers there. Again, I showed you in the past one. If you want to find factors in a calculator, y equals number over x. Okay, so that'll help you out on that one. So let's see, first two terms. So let's do these two first. We have biggest factor for both of these is actually a 7n squared. So I have 7n squared. That leaves me with a 7n minus 6. Divide both of these out. That's going to be a negative 3. Okay, remember that first one was negative, so you want to take out the negative there. And then we have positive 7n minus 6. So parentheses match, so I am good. 7n squared minus 3. 7n minus 6. There you go. That's factoring by grouping. So again, this leads into the next few days, so get really comfortable factoring by grouping because you're going to have to do this for the other ones as well.